Hey there, my name is Alex. I am the Silver Mont, and Elden Ring has been out for a while, long enough that I've played through the game multiple times and tried out many of the hundreds of weapons. So before the expansion arrives at an indeterminate point in the future, see what I did there, by the way? Tempting fate again. If I say I don't know when it's out, they will announce a release date 1 second after I upload this. Hopefully. But I thought it'd be fun to touch on some of my favourite weapons. And not just that, I want to hear your favourites too. Why? Because of course I haven't tried every weapon, and I'm sure there's some awesome ones out there that I've been missing out on. This is a roughly ordered list, and it isn't just the strength of these weapons, but the aesthetics, playstyle, cool factor, all that stuff. So let's get started, shall we? Number 5. The Tree Spear. You know, this was a weapon I found early on into my Elden Ring experience. Long before the game came out, in fact. I picked it up during a preview event. Whilst initially excited by how it looked, I dismissed it for quite some time as I thought it was too clunky. This was pre-release, so I didn't even really understand all the mechanics of the game at that point. Whilst the Ashes of War and the like can't be changed, this split damage great spear can be enchanted with weapon buffs, which isn't all that common amongst the weapons with split damage types, physical and holy in this case. So it can be a lot of fun to buff, say, Order's Blade or Electric Armament. It lends itself well to a Dex Faith build, but can certainly work with Strength as well. Strength Faith. But it does require a rather hefty stat investment. 15 Strength, 22 Dex, and 18 Faith. I don't think it's going to be topping anyone's best weapon list anytime soon in terms of efficiency. The second strong hit, though, being an overhead slice, is really cool. If I'm honest, it's a big part of what sold me on this weapon, odd as that might sound. But more so than any of that, doesn't it just look awesome? While spears have never been fantastic in the Souls games in terms of playability, for the most part they usually just poke, this one's visuals, combined with all the wonderful armors that you can combine with it in Elden Ring, are enough to land it a spot on my list. Honourable mentions go, of course, to the Trusty Partisan, which looks amazing in Elden Ring 2, and the Guardian Tree Spear, I think it's called, the one that looks like it's sort of made out of wood and it has a unique moveset, a little bit like a sword spear. That one's actually really good from a gameplay perspective, too. Number 4. Urumi. Is it a spear? Is it a whip? Yes. Whips have always been, they've always played a strange role in the Souls games. Once they were introduced in Dark Souls, I don't think there are any whips in Demon Souls. Whilst they can't be parried most of the time, their unusual hitboxes might be good for throwing people off. Their damage, never great. However, in Elden Ring in particular, they can be nasty for status ailment builds, especially if you have 2 of them. Urumi has fairly low stat investments, considering it can hit S scaling with Dex when infused appropriately. You can dual wield or power stance them for extra cool points and, well, as mentioned, status ailments. And the spear attack is just satisfying to look at and to use in practice. Is it a great weapon? Well, it's not awful, but I don't think it's going to win any DPS races, and even amongst the small whip class, the Rose, the Hoslow ones, those are kinda better, I imagine. But as you're no doubt aware, style greater than utility. It has quite a nice variety of Ashes of War or weapon arts that can be slotted into it, and I think it's versatile enough to work in a number of different builds. It can also make a nice sidearm or backup weapon, as it only weighs 3 units. The aesthetics of the weapon also lend itself well to many different outfits, so you're not like to run into the horrifying situation of struggling to find an ensemble that matches your weapon. Number 3. Cross Naginata. This is probably the best weapon on this list, one that you'll find is common amongst people seeking a strong and versatile weapon. Decent reach, decent speed, decent damage. Bleed built in. And as we all know, bleed and frost are the ways to go in Elden Ring if you want to be very effective. Better yet, use 2 of them. 1 bleed, 1 frost, and they still both, I think, get B scaling with dex. I could be wrong though. And they might have changed it, I don't know, I can't keep up with the patches. But you dual wield them like that, and you're going to make things explode over and over. For me, it was quite a novelty having a Naginata in a Souls game. The polearm's iconically associated with the Onimusha female warriors of Japan. As with the tree spear, it can slash vertically, as well as thrust and poke, thrust and poke, thrust and poke, all day long, which is always appreciated. Easily obtainable, strong, fun to use, great scaling, and if all that wasn't enough, you can shield prod people with it. Perfect. When I used it in my Let's Play of Elden Ring, I wasn't aware of how good it was. I wasn't expecting it to be as strong as it turned out to be. Number 2, Axe of Godfrey. The only downside when it comes to this axe is that you can't restore it to its original form. Seen here and there throughout the game. Well, maybe in the DLC. Maybe you're disappointed at the lack of strength or colossal weapons on this list so far. Whilst there's certainly a good number that I enjoy, I do love Malekith's Black Blade. It was hard coming up with just 5 weapons, but this was so very close to being my number 1. You know, I don't think I've ever seen another player using it. Invasion, summons, anywhere. Which is a bit of a shame, as it's so cool. Unfortunately, it's a rather late game acquisition, which probably plays into that, and hefty amounts of strength are required to use it, on top of its immense weight, and the damage isn't great, so when I said the only downside is we can't restore it, actually there's a few downsides. But that said, it's easy to upgrade, and it can hit like an absolute truck. The weapon art is really fun to use, absolutely demolishing things that are foolish enough to get in your way. You might be left open, but who cares about taking a few hits if you survive, and everything nearby does not. On top of that, you're then given a very cool follow-up attack after buffing yourself with that shout, stomp thing. So it's not the most practical of weapons, but it's certainly one of the most enjoyable for me. It's my favourite colossal and, well, one of my favourites in general. Sometimes an ash or a weapon art is enough to make a weapon all by itself. I can only hope that if we restore the weapon at some point in the DLC, maybe it will awaken to its true potential. But even now, I love it. Number 1. The Great Épée. The first surprising weapon, and potentially most surprising weapon I found in Elden Ring during my pre-release explorations of the game. I had no idea that heavy or great thrusting swords existed in Elden Ring, and this one immediately struck a chord with me. It was my weapon of choice for my first playthrough. I fell in love with it. Long silver swords are certainly my thing, and the notion of a heavy thrusting sword just seemed so right. Thrusting is fine, but those sweeps and slashes it has, that's what sold me on it, really. They're amazing. Even if a lot of time they might go over the head of a tiny enemy, you can put on a huge number of different ashes on it to suit your playstyle. Whilst you aren't going to hit too many A or B, and I don't think any S scaling bonuses, you can hit A in strength with it. Me, I went with a Spellblade sort of magic build. You might say it's inspired by a red mage from Final Fantasy. I stuck on the Carrion Greatsword Ash because it's so damn cool. Doesn't hurt that it hits like several tons of dynamite too. It's a nice vertical swing for those pesky ground crawling Gugamushes. But real talk, it's probably the coolest spell in the game, and one of the coolest ashes in the game because of that. I think this is probably the second strongest weapon in this list in terms of effectiveness behind the Naginata. But for the time being at least, it's my favourite weapon in Elden Ring. I think they nerfed it a few times since launch, because I'm sure it used to stagger things a lot more. If you chained a couple of charged up R2s, you would just like cripple bosses with consecutive attacks. But that doesn't bother me that they've nerfed it. You can't nerf the sheer style of this great PP. Well, that's my favourites. And if there's something I'd like to see in the DLC, well, I want to be surprised. so perhaps that's a silly thing to bring up, but a boring option, but one that I'd like to see anyway. Something like the Lois Greatsword from Dark Souls 2. Long, elegant, silver sword. That'd be great. But how about you? What are your favourite weapons in Elden Ring? Whether it's their strength, their style, or just a really cool weapon art. Like the Godslayer blade, which missed out on this list by a hair's breadth. I love the weapon art, but I don't really like the sort of helix design of the actual weapon model. But yes, let me know down below, and until next time, take care, bye.